to think of them now and start. Okay, folks, welcome. Good morning. It is now exactly 12 o'clock and we will start. This is a non-technical introduction to ChatGPT. I'm Peter Hartley and Sue Beckingham will introduce herself in a minute. And it is despite the image, which we generated free from one of these image generation programs last night. Despite the image, we will be steering well clear of the technology. And we will be talking about how folk use this technology and how you might wish to use it. We'll be keeping everybody on mute, so please communicate through the chat. That's what we want to do. Introduce ourselves very briefly. We'll give you a very brief history and context to ChatGPT. And the history and context is changing on a daily basis, as we'll mention in a minute. Then the main focus of this session is what GPT can do. And what we've done is we've assembled a series of examples which kind of illustrate that and which you can comment on. These slides will be available later, so you can go back to it and use them for whatever. And also we will update these slides because so much is happening in this area that we've already got from some references and sources to add in. And we'll then go on to some implications and issues and then spend a couple of minutes saying kind of next steps. And we've generated some further sources. We could have generated lists and lists and lists because there's so much coming out at the moment. But what we're trying to do is focus in on half a dozen or so good things to kick off with. Which you can then follow up on your own account. So, for example, there was this Australian webinar which happened the other day, and I'm getting an echo, and I don't know why. Let me start there. Just let me. Has that killed it? Hey. Something is echoing. I have no idea why. Okay, is that okay? Yes, that looks like it's done. Sorry about that. So that's our agenda and we will go straight on to it. Mention that webinar that's mentioned on that slide, and there'll be a link to that in the slides when we make them available over the next few days. So, Sue Beckingham, introduce yourself.
So I'm from Sheffield Hallam University and I've been interested in things like social media and technology and distance learning for a very, very long time. And certainly this new kid on the block, ChatGPT, is of great interest as it is to all of us. So a few of my publications up there. The most recent is working with Peter on success in group work.
Okay, and this is me. Similarly, self-promotion is the focus of this slide. So if there's anything on that slide when you come and look at it later that you want to follow up, please contact me and our emails are around. So terminology, Sue, talk us through the basic terminology.
So yeah, we just wanted to not get too techy, but for the benefit, because I'm always conscious that, you know, people might not be appraised of some of these things. So AI, if you hear that bandied about, stands for artificial intelligence, and it's a simulation of human intelligence processes by computer systems. So things that you might be familiar with, even if you don't personally use them, are Siri and Alexa. They're powered by AI. The GPT bit stands for Generative Pre-Training Transformer. And this ChatGPT software is owned by OpenAI. Sorry, did I lose myself there? I can't hear Peter now. I'll continue. So ChatGPT, according to OpenAI, is software that interacts in a conversational way in a dialogic format and makes it possible for GPT to answer questions, admit its mistakes, and it should, in theory, reject inappropriate requests. It should have been trained to do that, but that isn't necessarily always the case. You're muted, Peter. Peter, you're muted.
technology is trying to conspire against us today. The brief history of this technology actually goes back to the mid-60s. The very first chatbot is about the mid-60s, and Eliza, if that rings any bells for anybody, this was a online therapist. So you type in, I feel depressed today, and it would say something like depressed, how depressed are you, etc., etc. And the chap who invented it actually became a staunch critic of AI, because he invented Eliza as a caricature, but was rather horrified when people were spending hours on it. So there's a long history, and we'll put in a reference to that and its development if anybody wants to chase it. We've got OpenAI as the company that created several versions of GPT, and GPT-3 was the one that last year received lots of attention, and in particular, you can find lots of examples from that in the book by Sharples and Perez, which is at the end of in the sources. And ChatGPT is the latest version. It's free, it's more user-friendly, and has become the fastest growing online product of all time. So last year's GPT was GPT-3 and GPT 3.5. ChatGPT is the latest free version. We're expecting ChatGPT-4 to emerge. And ChatGPT Plus has been announced this week as a paid service. And apparently it'll be $20 a month in the USA, and it will give you better and speedier access and some additional features. The problem with ChatGPT at the moment is, even if you've got an account, a free account, which I have, you can often go on and find that it's working at capacity. So you can't, which is why we've not tried to bring in a live demo into this session, because you can't guarantee that it's always going to work. So Microsoft have invested very heavily in OpenAI, and there's an announcement they will put AI into all their products. And there's a Google event coming up later today at 1:30 by way of coincidence. And their resolution to this is called the Bard. And we'll put references into that as soon as we can find them over the next few days. So that's a very, very brief history, but we now have the position where Microsoft and Google are effectively competing to try and get customers to own this space. And there's an example of the fact that it's now got extensive mass media attention. Dan Fitzpatrick is now running a website. He's running courses, webinars. He's just announced a 3-hour course, which I think costs £89 if you want to invest in that. And to get some idea of the sort of arguments that he's making, you can follow that video clip and also have a look at the quotes on the next section, because that second quote is from Dan Fitzpatrick. Sue, do you want to talk us through these reactions?
So yeah, there's been obviously a lot of people talking about this, and lots of concerns that, you know, will it or won't it replace us as teachers, and the panics in terms of cheating are kind of the prominent things that people are worried about, the plagiarism. So in response to that, the QAA just a few days ago on the 30th of January have come out with a response in connection with academic integrity, and it's providing some useful recommendations. It was written in conjunction with Thomas Lancaster, who is an expert in academic integrity. So that's just one focus on it. They're not going into the detail about how it could be used in a positive context, but they wanted to get that brief out there that conversations need to be happening across all universities, you know, nationally, internationally. The genie's out of the bottle now, and we need to think about how we're going to have the conversations with our students and staff, of course, because everybody's at a different level of understanding what this tool is capable of. And
perhaps that last quote on that page, that this is from a study, and all of these quotes are referenced at the end of this presentation and on the slides, that ChatGPT would have received a B to B- grade on an MBA exam. So that gives you some idea of its power. And I see that Andrew has put in the chat the comment that it's going to be as big as the invention of the iPhone. And there are a number of commentators who are effectively saying similar kind of things to that. By the way, I've just seen a comment from Albert. The recording and the slides will be available afterwards, and they'll be available through the CEDA website. So we'll put an announcement on that for then. So Here's a few characteristics of ChatGPT text. First of all, it's grammatical. We've been using it for some weeks now. Grammarly thinks it's wonderful. It doesn't spot mistakes. So it's fluent grammatical English that comes out. It is relevant. It is plausible. We've managed to fool several expert readers by presenting them with text, which was perhaps a workshop plan or something like this. And if they're unaware of the text origins, they are fooled. And as we've implied with that last, the example from the MBA, it's worthy of a decent, good academic grade in some assignments. The interesting thing about one of the tests that has been done is that they found some very good results in, was it law, in economics and what have you, but it failed in creative writing. So perhaps there's hope for us yet. Anyway, other characteristics, Sue.
Yes, and that leads into it does not understand, so it doesn't know how to be critical or creative if it comes to that. So what it will do is trawl information that's actually out there. So that's going to bring in the good, the bad, and the ugly, unfortunately. So it will present things that are incorrect and even make things up, piecing together things that they think it trolls to that have connections. Interestingly, people have used this as a bit of fun. It can mimic different styles of writing. You know, you could actually tell it to write something in the guise of being a pirate or something of that nature.
And we'll see an example of that shortly. I see there's a comment coming out in the chat from Mick, who's been asking ChatGPT, and he found that the references were invented, and we'll come back to that a bit later on. So it can mimic different styles of writing, as we say there, but it can also invent stuff. And a comment from Joe, Perplexity seems to generate better references. There are now a whole range of other software starting to invade this field, and we will be producing some sources on that later on. And a comment from Annette, actually not good in law, but I think the point there is it really depends on the type of question. The less specific, the better it does. And I think that's a really important point when you start thinking about the impact of this. Okay. One way of looking at it is to compare the tools. So there's a comparison between Google and other search engines like DuckDuckGo, who deliver results as links. They provide details, obviously, of the sources because it's all in the links. So it's all about the links that is generated, whereas ChatGPT produces full text, details of sources. Well, it depends whether you ask for it. Doesn't do it automatically, and they may well be wrong. So it's not necessarily reliable or truthful. However, if you look at the bottom half of that slide, you can see the sort of capabilities that ChatGPT has, which are not there in Google. Writing code, constructing stories, can summarize information, can simulate conversation, and can also generate images, come to think of it. You can also get it to design an image, which you can then translate into another program. And as Mahar says, at the moment, they all have their flaws, but they will learn. And that's why we thought it was important to look at and start thinking about some examples. And these examples, we've got 6 for you. They're all responses are totally generated by ChatGPT. So first of all, we have ChatGPT explaining ChatGPT. Sue, and when you look at this and the other examples, you may like to pose some questions. Is the text coherent? Is it plausible? Are there any obvious errors? Anything that could be challenged? And particularly, any comments about what level ChatGPT is working at. For example, if a student presented you with this piece of text, would you accept it as probably their work? So what level of student would we expect to produce that level of text? An important point there from Salma, actually, who's in the chat. It's pre-trained. It was trained I think the training closed in the middle of 2021. So it does not have access to the latest stuff. And it doesn't know about the new Google interventions here. It doesn't know about the BARD, but we will do it. 1:30 or whatever this afternoon. And as Mick points out, there's a current limit of 2,000 characters. And point from Susan there, the learning is really important. Because obviously, if it's trawling from basically a 2-year-old internet, and it's got all the biases and distortions that may well be in there. Okay, Sue, do you want to talk us through ChatGPT, explaining ChatGPT?
So this is the question prompt that we asked ChatGPT first of all. So can you explain what ChatGPT is? But we want you to do this to a non-technical audience. So you can see the answer there. It's fairly straightforward. It's something that I think would give a brief overview, not dissimilar to some of the things that we might see on Wikipedia.
I would quibble with that last sentence. Does it help people communicate in a more natural and efficient way? But let's see what happens next. Sue?
So part 2 is asking ChatGPT to explain ChatGPT to a technical audience. So you can see it goes into the powered language developed by OpenAI, and then goes into the architecture and the training that it's had. It's a variant of the GPT-3 language, etc., etc. It's advanced technology, enables us to understand context, handle complex relationships between concepts, and produce coherent and informative outputs. And again, that's not necessarily always the case, because it's not gathering completely correct and factual information.
Okay, so given the audience we expected to come along to this session, we thought we'd better ask it, what is the future for educational development in higher education in the UK? And this is what it said. It's difficult to predict the exact future. Well, surprise, surprise. It then identifies current trends and developments. And I think we could probably accept that things like online and blended learning, notice the terminology, that would, there's a sense to that. Growing recognition further down the page of the importance of mental health and well-being. Okay, and institutions are exploring new approaches. Well, who'd have thought that? These and other developments are likely to shape the future of education development in the UK's higher education sector. Going back to the point that was raised in the chat about it's better with more general questions. I think those sort of phrases that you see indicate that it tends to work at a kind of level of generality that is not always necessarily very impressive. So is this good news? So we ask, does this future look like good news? And it's sitting on the fence. It's both opportunities and challenges, or is it giving a really precise answer? So it repeats the increased focus, student-centered learning, technology, but ends with a very bland sentence. The future of development is likely to be shaped by a number of complex and dynamic factors. Well, who'd have known? But education developers will need to be proactive and agile in order to stay ahead of the curve. And you wonder what level of language we're now talking about. Would you accept that if one of your PG Cert students, folk out there, had written this in their assignment? Would they have got away with it? Quote from Maha in the chat there. Undergraduate students write like this. So many people write this way. So is this going to change the nature of educational writing, I wonder? Let us see. Anyway, there's one example that another example that you can have a look at in more detail later if you wish. Example 3, why does ChatGPT sometimes lie? Sue.
And ChatGPT was quite honest and said that it doesn't always check or verify the information, and actually passes the book back to the user to say that, it's our responsibility to double check information it provides and to use additional sources to verify that accuracy. So it's not admitting that it's perfect. It's being quite blatantly clear that it can have information that could be incorrect.
And it's interesting that when we asked it to describe ChatGPT in the very first example, it didn't mention that it lies sometimes. So, depending on your question, you get some rather different perspectives.
Quite.
Useful quote in the comment again from Maha in the chat there. You can prompt it to give examples and references but again, they're not necessarily going to be totally accurate, particularly about the references. And yes, useful comment there from Brian. It's important not to personify it. It's a machine. And we'd like your votes here. This is when, if you ask it to answer a question in the style of a particular person, it will produce an answer. And perhaps a gold star to the first person who can tell us, who is this intended to emulate? So I asked it to answer the question in the style, ask what GPT is in the style of. Would somebody like to tell us? No, it's not me, Joe. I find that rather, I don't know how to take that. Yes, Brian is the first on the block. It was in fact Boris Johnson. And the data ain't spot on. It can lead to the occasional mistake. So there is a sense in which it has picked up. And perhaps a special award to Justin, who suggested Bugs Bunny. But if you put in Boris Johnson, that's what you get. And you can experiment that. You can have a bit of fun. And it is pretty, if you pronounce that out loud, you do get a sense of Boris. So we then started to ask it a few more complex questions. This is which of Shakespeare's main characters was the most tortured from a psychological perspective. And I see there's some comment in the chat again about critique of Instagram on mental health using Shakespearean language. I'd love to see that. In fact, maybe we need a repository of some of these really interesting examples. In fact, there are lots of mentioned Sarah Mills earlier on, who has produced a really excellent resource, which we'll reference in the slides when they come out. A sample of essays constructed by GPT-3 from last year. So the answer, it's a language model. I don't have opinions or emotions, but notice it personifies itself. I don't have opinions, but Hamlet is considered, well, yes, and it then talks about other characters suffer from intense psychological torment, but Hamlet struggles with his own mind and the ghosts of his past to make his story particularly poignant. And I think you can, sorry, yes, you're right, Anna, it's Anna Mills, sorry, my mistake there. And we'll put that reference in into the slides when they come out in a few days' time. So was that acceptable, this level of answer to the problem? What level of student would you expect to get an answer like that from? So our final example is to plan a presentation, produce an outline for a 15-minute PowerPoint presentation on ChatGPT, explaining what it is, what it does, and any significant limitations for lecturers and students in UK higher education. So that was the prompt, and that was the plan. So it produced a plan. It set itself out with numbers, headings, and subheadings. So we haven't done any editing on that except to highlight the main headings. So the text is all ChatGPT. I suspect if a student came to us and said, how about that for my presentation? You'd probably be acceptable, would you? You'd probably accept that. You can also act it to expand. So if you expand it, it then gives you more detail on each of the subtopics. And there's just an example. We've not done the whole thing for you, but you can see what it does. So it adds detail. I'm not sure how far you can go with the expansion. I think you keep it going several times and reiterate and what have you. And interestingly, the new tool that's been promised from Google does expansion. You can go through several levels. What do they mean by data bias? Is a question that's just come out of the... are you referring to the fact that it's based upon a database which was trawled from the internet about mid 2021 was when it stopped being trained on the database, and so it's obviously biased in the sense of that's its data. So if you ask it, for example, who's the Prime Minister of the UK, it says Boris Johnson. So there's a date stamp on all the information, if you like, which is not going to not be the case apparently with the new tool that's coming out of Google. So then finally we asked it to evaluate. So evaluate it using 4 criteria. We did not explain what the criteria were. We just said there's accuracy, relevance, and you'll see the other 2 criteria on the next slide. And this is what it said. So it gave an overall impression it's quite good. It provides an accurate overview on accuracy. It's relevant. And the second part of the evaluation that it produced was it's well structured, clear headings and subheadings. It covers all the key points. Quality of communication. We've yet to find a grammar, an error of punctuation in a text that ChatGPT produces. And finally, overall, it's a good foundation for a presentation on ChatGPT in higher education, demonstrates a good understanding of the topic. So it can evaluate, you can provide it with the criteria, it can evaluate. What you do with that evaluation, of course, is the next and perhaps interesting question. So there we have 6 questions, 6 examples of how you can use ChatGPT today, provided you can get online in it, provided it's not working to capacity. Next couple of slides are staff using GPT.
So some examples that we've put together, and there are more, and if people have more that are different to these, we would be very pleased to receive those from you to add to the collection that we've got. So as a study aid, so this was an article written by somebody in the US, I believe,
Yes.
and they were wanting to, a student was wanting to have a look at this, whatever DNA methylation. I can't even say the word, but this is an opportunity where a student could find out a bit more information, as you could to a certain degree with Wikipedia. This is going to be able to cover a much wider list of topics. In terms of a virtual teaching assistant, again, this could be questions that students have. They're writing their assignments very late at night. It's outside of class time. Could it provide them with some information that could help them progress with whatever that they're doing? People are looking at it from a grading point of view, so it could quite easily create a rubric for you, outlining the criteria or suggested criteria for the assignment. It's not necessarily going to grade to a good standard. It certainly wouldn't be able to say whether the citations and quotes in a essay or report, for example, were good or not. But it's got that potential. In terms of lesson and curriculum planning, there's lots of examples where you ask it that question and it can put together a nice cohesive plan that it's a starting point, if nothing less. It's something that you could actually expand on and improve to suit your need. It's been used by tutors to give formative feedback, and a lot of this is on the structure and the grammar of an assignment, and that's been quite useful to give to students that are undertaking a dissertation, for example. They can then use that feedback, and they're well aware that this is from ChatGPT, that was disclosed by the tutor that did this particular thing. But it's something that can be used by students. It can also be used to design presentations, so it can help you find slides, backgrounds, the whole design of how you present those things. And somebody used it quite recently just to say, well, what are the concerns that we've got? What are the privacy concerns we should be letting our students know about? And she sent that question to ChatGPT, and it brought back some really useful points. And again, these are discussion points you can have in the conversations that are so important to have with your students.
Yeah, we'll need to move quick through the last few slides. Just a point there from Andrew, and quoting a post from Minette that GPT-4 is coming out. Will have, quote, greater moderation and safety protocols. Nice input there from Dustin, thank you, with some examples. And I'm just trying to help. You respond to a chat from Scarpa. How does it help with grading? Well, what we did was we fed it the text we wanted it to grade. We then said, grade it using these criteria, and it then produced what you've seen there. And other folk have done much more specific examples. Well, we'll see, Minette, about how we go in grading. You also can, as Maha says there, write an introductory syllabus. So there's a really good example of students using ChatGPT productively. And this student has found 5 ways to become a speed learner, using it as a kind of personal tutor, as a study buddy, to create tests, etc. And I'd urge you to have a look at that link. It's not very long, but she talks through how she is using it. And finally, obviously, there are lots of important issues and implications. Can we reliably identify an AI-generated text? Not with current tools, probably, but there's more detail coming out on that, and people are focusing on that. Can we control the use? Probably not. In fact, I would say certainly not. We can perhaps talk about that. So certainly, we think the focus should be on using it positively, getting institutions to talk about it. So we do need an institutional strategy. Sue, do you want to talk us through some more important issues very quickly?
Yeah, we haven't got much time, so I think it's a conversation really how we as individuals can use it, and I think those conversations have to go on. How we're going to develop the critical AI skills in our students and our staff. We're going to have workshops, staff development events for our colleagues for sure. And, we need to be conscious about the data security and privacy things. And there was a whole list that came up in the example that we gave previously. And, as with all of these products, it hooks you in with the free version, and then we've got the paid, sort of super versions. What's going to happen then if, students are disadvantaged because they can't afford to pay for what might end up being a premium product, which is always on the agenda.
We are conscious of time, folks, and we need to stop. Next steps, we'll just alert you to a couple of CEDAR events, and we'll be publicizing them strongly over the next week or so. These slides have the various sources associated with them, the sources that we referred to earlier, also some more sources of Sharple's book and some other really good examples that we've found. We will add to that over the next few days because we found some interesting thoughts, interesting new sources, and we will also add in references to whatever comes out of the Google announcement, which will be glued to in about an hour's time. So thank you in particular, everyone who's contributed to the chat. We'll store the chat and help you to and add that to our information. And
thanks for the extra links, Maha and others that have put those in there. That's
absolutely
really helpful.
Yeah. So thanks very much, folks. And I'm sure this is not the last you'll hear from us on this. Bye for now.
Bye-bye, everyone.